Well, it's only been 5 very enjoyable months since the Labour government took over this fine country, but this week it sounds like there's going to be a bit of a relaunch. Now, Downing Street is saying it's not a relaunch, it's not a relaunch. Those terrible polling numbers, that's not why we're doing this. This has been planned ever since we came into government, that we needed a moment where we were going to settle everyone down and say, right, voters, this is what we're going to do on your behalf. And this moment is this week, Camilla. And I know, Camilla, you're very, very excited.
So excited. It's coming on Thursday. Will I be able to sleep between now and then?
Only 3 sleeps until Thursday, Camilla. So do try and contain yourself ahead of this big moment. And what is the speech called? Plan for Change.
My plan for change.
I feel I'm with Keir Starmer in the studio. That is absolutely brilliant.
Before we discuss what is in this plan for change, shall we discuss why there needs to be a plan for change, even though the plan for change definitely was in the ether before things went south for Keir Starmer? And they've gone spectacularly south, let's be honest. Let's have a look at the latest polling. A new survey released over the weekend by polling company Opinium suggests that Starmer's approval rating is now minus 32%. So 22% approve of his performance versus 54% who disapprove. That means he's 8 points down in just 2 weeks. Just as a comparator, only Liz Truss, who didn't make it to the same point, admittedly, she only served for 49 days, suffered a steeper initial decline in her rating. The other little marker, we've discussed it, is the Andy Peters point that Nigel Farage apparently is now more popular than Keir Starmer. And Reform announced with a degree of glee yesterday that they were level pegging Labour in Wales as the main opposition to Plaid Cymru. So it's not looking particularly bright. That the ringing in our ears of the Blair anthem, things can only get better, with old Brian Cox, bless his hearts, on the drums, keyboard, with Brian Cox, bless his planet-loving heart, on the keyboard. We're trying to sing a different tune, aren't we, Kamal? We're trying to sing a tune of Labour hope over the adversity that they've faced.
Certainly, this is nothing like 1997 for all of us who lived through that era in the media and were covering politics. The tone I keep hearing when I hear things like plan for change is the Ed Stone and Ed Miliband sort of laying out these promises to the nation. I will promise to you. And I am not convinced that that is the way that voters want to hear about how the government is working for you. So the problem that they will immediately have, and I think this is one of Keir Starmer's biggest problems, is the way they communicate is in this very moralistic, bureaucratic way that I'm going to do these things for you and you should be quite grateful. So let's just go through a little bit about, supposedly it's been reported well ahead of the events on Thursday, what this plan for change is going to be about. Apparently it's about the next phase of government, although of course there's always a next phase of government. Do you remember those missions that no one really remembers, missions. And also the 6 steps to feed the missions, this kind of language that nobody uses. Now, number 10 says that the targets will allow the public to hold Sir Keir and his team to account on their promises. Now, here I have some time for them. If they publish numbers and say on these different areas, this is what we're going to do, you can test us against them. So they've realized that these missions are not how people speak and not what people are talking about. So these targets are going to be set on things that people actually care about and talk about. So we're going to have living standards. So are living standards increasing? House building targets, NHS waiting lists, children and whether they are ready for school. One of the amazing effects of COVID is so many children arriving at reception and their first years at school lacking the language skills and the social skills that we would imagine they should have. And that's going to be one of these areas.
Not even potty trained in some cases.
Many cases. One thing apparently where there are not going to be targets, although he is going to mention the issues, is on immigration, stopping the boats, and the connected issue of asylum. So that's going to be a difficult area for him to navigate.
Not sure whether people are going to be receptive to ideas around bringing down immigration, but not actual targets. You mentioned the Ed Stone earlier. Might a better plan for change simply be to say that Ed Miliband is no longer going to be Energy Secretary? I mean, that's one thing that I think the public is crying out for. Closure of Vauxhall on the back of Labour's exacerbated on Tory ZEV targets, a degree of bungling, of course, around the winter fuel allowance and all the rest of it. So all of this catalogue of errors, Rachel Reeves seemingly telling porkies on her CV, the departure of Louise Haigh, these are the issues that have really cut through. So he can do this speech on Thursday, and of course we will cover it. Hey, send me up there, wherever it is. I'm going to be there with a notebook. I don't mind. But he has to accept that people don't sit at home and watch the speeches on the Downing Street steps, unless they're resignations, or the big set pieces. You know, he'll probably be in a factory somewhere, flanked by construction workers in yellow hats. You know, the bad stuff cuts through unless the good stuff is so good and so well delivered. To hark back to 1997, you know, education, 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 tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, delivery, that cuts through, okay? That is why we've got this situation where, comparatively to the last Labour government, we were talking about it the other day, first Labour resignation from Cabinet under Tony Blair is Ron Davies. 18 months in, they're scrabbling around trying to repair things 5 months in. Having said all that, sorry to name drop, I was with Jeremy Hunt at the weekend. I was at the party of GB News' CEO, Angelo Frangopoulos, and he happened to be there because I think he's the local MP and is local. And he was making the point to me, and funny enough, Zia Youssef, who was in the kind of discussion, he's the chairman of Reform, we interviewed him last week, about how bad things actually are for Labour in comparison to the reality of the situation. And the former Chancellor, Mr. Hunt, said, you know, let's just all not get overexcited here. Yes, they've had a terrible start, but this is a marathon, not a sprint. Plenty of time to make up for past mistakes. So it's all very good having a reset that they're not calling a reset, but unless you're actually going to say something pretty dramatic, particularly, you know, how typical of Starmer. How bad is this man as a politician? We're going to say a few things about a few things, but we're not going to put a target on immigration. Whoa, no, that would be far too bold and brilliant. So instead, we're going to do something decidedly mediocre and average.
Where they're not going to move are on the pensioners' winter fuel allowance, on the inheritance tax for farmers. But there is a sense I'm getting from my sources in government that on this issue of zero emissions vehicles, they are looking to a way out on the fines that car companies do get at the moment if they don't hit these targets. How can they unravel those? And I'm also told, and that would be a blow to Ed Miliband and his push for net zero. The second thing is Angela Rayner and the new employment rights that she is also forcing through. That, remember, we are in a 2-year consultation period. I imagine that on net zero and on employment rights, Rachel Reeves and others on that wing of the party, which is within the party known as the right of the party, are just going to slowly try and pick away a little bit on all that, on all those policies, because they know that if they cannot hit that first target, that people feel better off under Labour. And when they say living standards, they mean people's incomes going up. That's the very simple. What did Kamala Harris get wrong in the US election? She talked about growth and gross domestic product. No one talks about that. They talk about my income and our prices going up. So the things you have to do is make sure people's incomes are going up and prices are going up less fast than their incomes. That's the golden point. And Rachel Reeves is going to push, I think, to not sacrifice completely, but to downgrade anything else that is not focused on that, because we know the budget has been broadly anti-growth.
Also, they had this pledge in their 5 missions, right, to have the fastest growth in the G7. Again, that's a bit intangible because people scratch their heads and go, "Who's in the G7?" Oh,
Yeah, what is the G7?
what
Yeah,
is it?
yeah, yeah.
Let's remind people: Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom and the United States. But the perception of the G7 is that it's a bit broken. People, I think, have an idea that Germany's economy, for instance, isn't doing that great at the moment. A better comparator might be we are going to try to emulate the US in terms of growth because its growth has been double that of the G7. This is another interesting thing that the former Chancellor said to me. He said, on productivity, it's currently languishing post-COVID at around 0.6% in the public sector. And when he was at the Treasury, he turned around to the civil servants there and said, look, what rate of growth in productivity do we need to achieve for the state to stop expanding, for the state to stop getting bigger and us actually being able to deliver some tax cuts? And the figure that came back was it just needs to grow by another 1%. That isn't a large amount. They've put all of their money on growth, and yet all of the policy announcements so far are anti-growth. Businesses have reacted badly to them all. We had yet more evidence at the weekend of businesses contracting and losing confidence in this government. So my goodness me, they have got a lot of work to do.
And they're constantly sending the message that the state can solve all ills. The state is not the only player. The private sector is the main player that brings growth. And so they can make all these claims about we want to be the fastest growing country in the G7. But that's not going to be true because America is going to outgrow us and they're a member of the G7. So straight away, a promise made is a promise broken. They then say, okay, we're not going to say that because people don't understand what that's about anyway. So now we're going to say living standards will improve. Well, whether living standards improve is up to, is the government setting the type of environment where business can flourish? The exact opposite, as you say, of how businesses have responded to the budget. The businesses have said, actually, we're going to contract.
Yeah.
And because of national insurance on employers, we're going to be offering fewer jobs. And this is where is the frustration for Labour supporters, and I think a lot of people within the Labour government and within Number 10, is that they keep saying we want growth and they keep doing things that are anti-growth. And those two things is why the public are saying, hang on a minute, you're saying one thing, but your actions are doing another. Three things where I think they are going to try and push into a fresher place for the public. Quite quietly, 2 weeks ago, they brought back one of Blair's most popular policies, ASBOs, antisocial behaviour orders.
Love an ASBO.
They brought those back. That's going to be in the crime and policing bill in the new year. The big issue is going to be about reform and productivity in the NHS. Big bill on that also in the new year. And the third thing is benefit changes and tackling the huge worklessness problem. So if they can align those three things, those are things that the public want to see. And the government needs to say much, much more about what voters want to see, not these high sort of moral tone, political, broad macro issues, which is where the left always struggles to connect with the public.
We need tangibles, Kamal. We'll find out on Thursday whether we get any.